Is mental health getting worse?
I think it's definitely getting worse. We decided to focus on adolescent and adult males, or those between 10 and 25, because those are the ones that are in most need of health care and the least likely to get it.
Boys and men have a pediatrician till age 16 and then fall off the face of the earth in healthcare when girls go to the gynecologist.
There are more males that are diagnosed with ADHD than females, but we don't know whether that is because it's a male bias or whether it stems from basic issues like unrecognized depression and anxiety. Suicide, it's 4 times among young males than it is young females, and a lot of that comes from depression, which is frequently unrecognized in young males.
Dennis is dealing with just something you don't talk about.
The core of what we do, it appears more and more every year that mental health is the key point of entree into addressing overall health for young males.
I can't tell you how many times I have just stated the fact to the patient in front of me that they're infertile and they're the reason, and they would start crying. Men
are privileged, so why do we worry about men? Men have been privileged, for example, in the area of business, but in health it's a totally different question.
I have body issues all the time that I'm always...
It's not about you, Rob.
I know. Our topic today on Talk with Turek is men's mental health.
Did you know that 4 out of 5 suicides are men?
I learned that because of people like you and our guest today. They are less likely to seek help. Men are less likely to talk about it and more likely to go it alone. So today we want to be part of changing that conversation.
Absolutely.
Our guest on the show today is Dennis Barbour. He's the founder, president, and CEO of the Partnership for Male Youth. It's a collaboration among 23 national health-related organizations, and for over 13 years, they've been leading the mission to address the unmet healthcare needs of adolescent and young adult males between the age of 10 and 25. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So on the show, we advocate for men's health.
Yes.
And we've talked about the mental anguish of fertility that women go through, and I've kind of tried to speak up to say men definitely are affected mentally by infertility.
So you're saying men are people too?
Men are people too. And recently, a really good friend of mine, a colleague, lost his son to suicide. And we went to the funeral. His son was 22-ish, I think, and it's just... I remember even telling you, hey, you know what it is we had to postpone one of our sessions and recording because we had to go to this funeral. And when I said that, it lit something up in your heart too that was like, and that's why we need to do a show for especially for young men.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's a sobering statistic. And it's been consistent for years.
I also have 2 sons. So I have an 18-year-old and I have a 12-year-old. And I'll say my older son takes medication for depression, and it has drastically improved his life since he's been taking this medication. And I will say that it took us a while to get there. You know, there's something about, we don't want to admit that this might be something that would help him for some reason. And
what's going on?
What's going on? And so we needed to get Dennis here.
Yeah.
You said, I know this guy, Dennis Barbour, and he has a nonprofit that addresses this exact issue. And I'm like, where's he been our whole life? So Dennis, before we get into the statistics, tell us about yourself. I mean, why do you do this? What brought you to this work?
What brought me to this work was my previous position. I was the president of the Association of Reproductive Health Professionals. And although it says reproductive health, in fact, it was mostly women's focused on women's health care.
Right.
And so from that, at that time, rather, what I asked folks about was, what about men's health? And their response was, what is that?
Exactly.
Anyway, since then, I've had this passion to do something about it. And in the late 2000s, I reached out to colleagues that I'd worked with in reproductive health to get their impression about, is there a need for this? Is there a need for an organization? And the consensus was, yeah, go for it. And so that's how we got started. We decided to focus on adolescent and adult males, or those between 10 and 25, because those are the ones that are in most need of health care and the least likely to get it.
Well, tell us, what does the Partnership for Male Youth do specifically?
We have a variety of programs. The overriding purpose for the organization is to build awareness of the problems. But beyond that, we have developed resources for clinicians, to help guide them on how they can be better providers of health for adolescent and young adult males and for parents. Particularly, parents are one of our principal audiences. And so those are the two areas. We also work with youth. That's just a burgeoning area of our focus just recently.
The group he's talking about, we've talked about on the podcasts as a group of boys and men who have a pediatrician till age 16 and then fall off the face of the earth in healthcare when girls go to the gynecologist. I'm transitioning my daughter to a gynecologist right now. There's nothing to do for men. So medicine is totally siloed into adult, specialists, and men just either come to the ER if they're in pain or their life is threatened, and that's where they start. It's sobering to me on a much more mundane level to have a man come in at 35 with 3 kids, productive for a vasectomy, and he's got malignant hypertension because it's the first time anyone's taken his blood pressure at 35, and he's he's the root of the family.
Mm-hmm. What are we missing right now? What's the overarching thing that you stand up when you're invited to come and speak or to advocate for? What do you say?
Well, in terms of occurrence of disability disease, suicide is probably the leading factor, because with adolescent young adult males, it's 4 times the rate of adolescent young adult females. And what that results in is a whole cascade of issues, starting with depression, anxiety, risky behaviors, accidents, so on and so forth, and we can talk about each of those. And also physical health issues like STIs. The core of what we do, it appears more and more every year that mental health is the key point of entree into addressing overall health for young males.
Just tagging along with that, the lack of medical care, fertility care, medical care for young men is certainly compounded by mental health, which is even more, rarefied in existence. So Dennis is dealing with just something you don't talk about.
So how do we overcome these impediments, Dennis? What do we need to be doing?
A whole bunch of stuff. One of the other elements here is norms of masculinity, of course. Even if you would provide care, there is some stigma associated for young males with seeking out health care. So that's really a kind of a key issue. Just going back to what you were talking about before about medical providers, I think one of the important points is that of the primary care specialties and those that would logically see young males, they don't get the training. There are adolescent medicine specialists in this country, but believe it or not, there are only 1,000 of them for 35 million males. So that kind of underscores the need for greater training with the other primary care specialties.
Yeah, do doctors need to be trained? So, he's a fertility doctor, but he needs to be able to assess an issue in mental health, like you're saying.
Well, I would say this, Dennis, that as a caretaker of young men for their fertility issues, I find myself being their mental health provider lots of times. And you see a lot of sexual health issues express themselves, dysfunction expressed in stress, anxiety, depression is the source of it. So I work very closely with mental health professionals when I can, and the issue is getting them there. That's the big issue.
Yeah, that's with us, that's one of the greatest challenges, because we've always said if you can raise awareness, you train the clinicians, you develop the tools and resources for the clinicians, then you have to get the guys there, and that's one of the major stumbling blocks. So what we have done is we have reached out to where they are, to finding where they are in places like they are. For example, working with coaches and fraternities. On the deficit side of it is you would think that, for example, school nurses would be a logical place, but we've done focus groups with school nurses, and they, again, are not typically trained in mental health issues. So we have to find them where they are. When we have found them where they are, that is working with coaches to give them health guidance, and with fraternities, we've been very successful, particularly in the area of mental health with fraternities. Guys seem to be more open to talking about that. We've also noticed that with fraternities, one of the areas where they're most surprised to learn, which is really surprising to us, is because of the college level, is sexual and reproductive health. They're woefully unprepared for sexual and reproductive health issues.
By the way, when I was in college in a fraternity, just to give you, it's just very generational, right? So for me, I was considering donating sperm for like $100 because I needed money for college, for beer at college, right? It was something just totally, that's how detached I was from the importance of a major decision like that.
I don't know if that idea of working with them where they are, because I always believe that's the way to get it men. I think that started when we met at the White House during the Obama administration, and Vivek Murthy called the Dialogue on Men's Health. And we all showed up, and there was the Packers and the football teams, the YMCA. You were there, I was there. And the question was, how do you take better care of men? It was a time when the Office of Men's Health was being considered, which it currently is being considered again. And I think at that whole day meeting, the thing I learned the most is you got to go where they are. And that's what you're doing, which is, you know, their organizations, their groups, their family, their religious organizations, their sports teams. And that's the way to reach them. And I think you're finding success there.
Yes, we are. And one of the interesting anecdotes, I suppose, is with coaches. You would think that it would be the older coaches that would be the most resistant to doing this kind of education, but it's actually the young coaches, which I don't know whether it's a spillover from when they were adolescents, but in any event, it's an interesting tidbit.
Young men need mentors.
Yes, and I would ask the question, where do you find them? How do you list the mentors, and where do you place them? You can even get a cohort of people that want to be mentors, but you have to have the locus for them to actually interact with the males.
It seems to me from the Washington meeting that sports teams and sports champions are a really good way to go. I don't know about actors in Hollywood, but I think, you know, Curry, someone who, someone like
Stephen
that
Curry
would
or somebody,
influence
would be a big
lots
one.
of people.
So I'm concerned with the number one relationship with some of these kids, these boys have, are their fathers, right? And it's not that I'm supposed to sit and tell my kid that I get him in a mental health or class or have mentors. I feel like I need to level up my own awareness of my own mental health
By example.
So we're saying we need to reach these young men, but I think there are old men that we need to still be reaching as well, so that we can lead by example, show them that it's important to us and that we're ready to be the change in that conversation.
Dennis, tell us about dads in this equation.
The principal source of information on health for adolescent and young adult males, for health questions generally, is the mother. The women are more attuned to it and more aware of the needs of their young sons. One of the things that has happened to us in our work is that when we're talking to a general audience about the problems, they generally are not aware of them. But when I talk to individual mothers of teenage sons, they get it immediately. They understand what the issues are that these kids are confronting. With dads, not so much the case. As a segue, one of the things that has come out in the research lately that's kind of interesting is that there is this perception that young adult males are kind of drifted away. They're not interested in family. They're not interested in getting married. They're not interested in employment and what have you. The fact of the matter is there was a study that was just released recently that indicated that young men, a majority of young men, in fact, want to have families. They want to get married. They want to have kids. I don't know how that compares with previous generations, but I think it's a hopeful sign, because presumably if they're that interested in those issues, that they will become more engaged with their kids than men typically are. But you got to get back to this whole, one of the issues is norms of masculinity. The older guys they're living by the same norms as the younger ones are.
Right.
And the thing of weakness and stigma is one of the issues that pops up with men generally.
And even in the subject of fertility, this is a thing too, that the most men come in and they have a problem getting their wife pregnant. They feel very vulnerable, right? And that's what you're seeing on a daily basis.
When I see men who are infertile and say they have no sperm count, they're taken aback in a way I've never seen a man be taken aback, like, what was your thought when you were told that you had no sperm? And they say, I had a biological identity crisis, or they're not saying anything. And I was thinking about, I wrote a blog about this in a Freudian way. So you have an id, ego, superego, and the id is the primitive eat, sleep, reproduce. The ego tempers that and makes sure it's socially acceptable, and the superego is the morality for it all. This is the Freudian view of this. And it's like, how does that explain it? Well, the id says you need to eat, sleep, and reproduce, and it's fundamental. The superego and the ego do not comment on it. So if you have a problem with fertility, it's the first time that individuals ever even considered the issue. It ever even came up.
Right.
Unlike death, where you watch it on TV, you know what happens if you cross the street on a green light. But this was completely, there's no initiation, there's no exposure to the whole mind to this idea, and they don't know how to react. It's an emptiness. Like you pulled the rug out from under them in a way that they've never seen before, because no part of their mental capacity has ever dealt with it. And that's the kind of thing we're dealing with, and we don't really know how to respond.
It's also evidence of vulnerability, which is something that typically males don't want to feel, that they're vulnerable.
Who are the key leaders right now in men's health today that are addressing the needs of young men, mental health?
Who's helping you out?
It's interesting. When we started 13 years ago, we were really voices in the wilderness because there was very little attention given to this, particularly with adolescent young adult males. But in the last few years, not focused specifically on health. We're still the only major organization that's focused on health issues for that cohort. But there has been, like Richard Reeves started an American Institute for Boys and Men back about 2 years ago. He wrote a book on the subject. And they have done phenomenal work in terms of research and raising awareness of the importance of men's health generally, well, boys and men's health, that large group of folks. The other group that comes to mind is Movember. They started out with prostate cancer, but now today they're one of their focuses is mental health, and they're turning towards that and embracing it. Those are two of the big leaders in the field. Richard Reeves is, and not only is he knowledgeable and has a backbench of researchers, it's really impressive, but he is a celebrity in his own case, in his own sake.
That's great.
What is Partnership for Male Youth kind of doing to change the awareness overall for these issues? How are you guys getting there practically?
One of the key things we do is with parents and caregivers, because they, again, going back to women particularly, but they are the ones that are closest to these issues and are best able to understand them. And so we've done a lot of work in terms of developing resources for parents and other caregivers. Clinicians are, as I said before, a really tough nut because they don't get the training. An example of this was years ago when I was in preventive medicine. I worked with the medical school departments of preventive medicine. We would talk to the American Association of Medical Colleges, for example, and talk about the importance of integrating prevention concepts in medical training. And they said at the time, which I thought was amazing, they said, oh, we don't worry about that. Eventually, medical students are going to demand that and want that, and that's when things will change. Well, things have changed because apparently that's what happened. But that was kind of the attitude. And if you go to the typical providers groups like the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, they still not aware of the cognizant of the importance of this issue. There is another organization called the Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine that for years has not had, well, it's never had a session on adolescent and young adult mental health until this year, when we had one, and it was on the issue of mental health, specifically on the issue of depression. So it's harder within the clinician community, and the youth community is also hard because you have to, as I said before, you have to engage them where they are, and that gets into picking out these populations like fraternities and coaches and athletics.
One of the key findings I also took back from the White House meeting that we went to during Obama's era was the fact that reaching them where they are is reaching them on 99% of young adults have a cell phone. getting them on their phone is one of the places to get them where they are. And that came out to me. I think I presented my data on engagement of my men in surgeries by using an app where they would respond on their phone. And I had 95% engagement on post-surgical versus 5% in the typical scenario where you just operate and they call if there's trouble. And that was incredible. And I presented that. And I think that's one of the ways to get them where they are, is to get them on their phones. And the question is, how do you do that? You have to be hip.
You know, where they are in their rooms.
Yes.
Have you noticed that too, Dennis? It's like, it's one thing to go to a fraternity where they are all in a group waiting for you in some way, but it's young men are just sitting in their rooms right now on their phones.
Well, that, again, is really a challenge because of the presence of the manosphere online. One of the things that contributes to them being in the basement is the fact of the employment opportunities. The employment opportunities are really lowered now for young men, in part because they're not graduated from college. But that kind of exacerbates the manosphere issue. In terms of how you reach them, there are organizations that are actively involved in that, in putting together programs that will actually appeal to these young guys. But it's tough because of the competition, as I said before, with the manosphere.
Talk about the manosphere.
I haven't heard that term before. That's interesting. What is the manosphere?
It's a culture.
It absolutely is a culture. It absolutely is a culture. It's there because there are other healthier cultures that are missing.
It's a culture of like traditional masculinity combined with
Misogyny. Misogyny is a very large part of it. And again, because young men are faced with educational and employment challenges, this opens them up to blaming. And that's where the misogyny comes into it. Because if you can blame women, then you can also become an incel, for example, involuntarily celibate, for example, is that's what that term means.
You know, one thing that you said was interesting is that most of the direction of young men's healthcare comes from their moms, right? And so it's funny, I'm sitting here saying, what about the dads? We need to affect the dads, but it sounds like we need to be communicating directly to moms.
Absolutely. And that's actually, when we work with parents, we particularly focus on the moms.
because they mostly have moms and dads are largely not present.
Right. But again, what would we do? What's the world look like? You mentioned Office for Men's Health with the government. So I'm saying, hey, we can make a big dent by dads and coaches and fraternities. But what can the government do in this situation?
Great question for Dennis. Dennis, there's a bill in the Senate now in February 20th, 2026, that the third attempt for an Office of Men's Health, bipartisan support for it. Christine, the Office of Secretary of Health, is a urologist. This is a new time. There's the Make America Healthy Again movement. So do you see this as maybe getting through the Senate? There's been an Office of Women's Health for 35 years. There's no Office of Men's Health. I would think that would be an asset to your program.
It would be, but I'm not optimistic about that happening at the national level, particularly today. However, with that said, a lot is happening at the state level. As a matter of fact, Virginia just last week finally passed a bill to set up a commission on men's health. And it's the first state in the country that has done that. Other states, Maryland is another state, Washington State is another. Governor Whitmer in Michigan is involved in this. So there's a lot percolating up from the states that I am optimistic that this will eventually translate into some federal action.
Yeah, and I think that if I were any state with a commission like that, I would call you because you're the guy to talk to for teenagers and young adults and what can we do for them, raise awareness. You have so much knowledge about access that no one thinks about to these men. But I was thinking, the Office of Women's Health has been so valuable for women's health. 80% of breast cancers are curable now. It organized all the awareness programs. The Women's Health Initiative was funded by the Office of Women's Health, And that has been an incredible story for 35 years of what you do with menopause, domestic violence acts have been passed because of it. It's on so many fingers, on so many levels, it's changed women's health. God, would that be helpful for men?
Oh, it would be, absolutely.
Just on an attention, just to bring attention to the fact. I mean, that's what everybody has been brought to the attention that women need this focus to save them from breast cancer and from all these things. What do you all propose as doctors? How old is a young man when they need to be assessed, their fertility to be assessed, which is a health marker for them, and then we include mental health in there? Is it 14?
I would, I don't know. I mean, you can't really look at fertility in a young guy, right?
Right.
So typically they're fertile 2 years after they go through puberty is when you're considered fertile. But there's a lot of things to look at there. Do they ejaculate? And you're not going to teach them how, blah, blah, blah. So that's no man's land, that whole thing. We have very little data on that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to compare it to when a girl has her first period, and then all of a sudden she has a whole nother doctor set and a whole nother set of attention. So is there a time?
That's one of the slippery slopes that's hard to know with men because everyone's a little different, and puberty isn't the same process in boys and girls. So there's no mark at which point you're an adult.
Right.
I mean, I guess the voice change, but that's sort of early in puberty. So it's a hard target to pin down.
I just hope early is what it is, because I do think that our society today is at least accepting that mental health is as important or getting there with physical health.
Do you think that's true, Dennis? Are we?
Yes, absolutely, that is true.
Okay.
Absolutely. And it's been parallel with more attention being given to men's health generally in the last few years. But as example, as I said before, Movember, what they have been, prostate cancer and testicular cancer were the major areas of their focus, but they have just adopted mental health as one of their most important areas to focus on.
So Dennis, I have let's say, I do have an 18-year-old, but say I have an 18-year-old and I'm noticing these things that we've been talking about, being recluse in his room or showing signs of anxiety. What do I do? What's my first step?
The first thing is just open and honest communication that's non-threatening.
Yeah.
Listen.
That's how you open the door.
So open the door with communication is the first step. It's interesting that in my practice with young men, I do best finding out what's wrong by listening. So I don't start the conversation. I give them room, and it comes very naturally. And often I'll learn that the problem that was ascribed to them when they came in is not what they want to talk about or is not the real problem. So I think that's what I do with my teens, is just give that space to just be there. Just be there. I think that's really important. Open communication.
Totally, but where I'm getting to is even beyond myself, what do I do? But trust me, there are tons of fathers out there that don't have that capacity, or they're not doing it. Do I sign my kid up for Partnership of Male Youth? Do I get them a coach or a therapist? How do I practically start to do this with some of the other organizations or help out there?
They need coaching themselves.
Right.
Because you're not familiar with the issues.
Right.
And so along with communication comes education. You have to learn about these issues and become conversant with them in order to have the conversation and the communication with your son. So that's what I would say would be the first thing. It's just to seek information before you embark on this voyage of talking to your son. Or as Paul said, listening. That's the most important element of this, is listening.
So you say you go into a fraternity and create the awareness, and then so in the fraternity, are those college kids, is there a step for them to take? Is it just go get a therapist?
It's actually one of, I believe, the key things that comes out of that process is the fact that they just start talking about mental health. That they come to the educational experience not being open to talking about mental health issues. But once you break that barrier, they do open up. For example, we work with two men who started organizations because their sons were lost to suicide when they were in college. And one of the things they do is they go around the country talking to coaches and with fraternities about mental health issues. And one of the things that's important is for the leadership in the fraternity world, which is quite convoluted, but in any event, in the fraternity world, to get to the leadership of the fraternities and to make them aware of what the issues, mental health issues are, because some of this starts from the top. But if you give guys in a local fraternity the opportunity to have a conversation about this, they generally open up.
Wow. So that is a big part of it. That's a big part of, like, alcoholism or an addiction is realizing the problem is a big part of solving it.
Right, right.
Is there hope out there right now?
Well, as we said before, the what's happened in terms of the general discussion about young men in the past few years, there's been a lot of progress. People, if nothing else, are aware of the problem, and they're not blaming young men, which has been the response in the past, the typical response in the past, to say, why are you in the basement? Get your gear together and get out there and get a job. Of course, one of the reasons they're in the basement is because they can't get a job.
Right. What was your first job?
Lawn mowing.
Okay, mine was working at like the salad bar at Sizzler or something, and then I was at Domino's. I drove for Domino's, but I was 15 when I got my first job, and then I was working at 16. When I go to the local, I don't know, coffee shop right here in town, the people that are working at restaurants are 30.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or a grocery store. I go to Trader Joe's.
Well, it is
and
LA, and they're trying
it
to
is.
act, and they can't get in, and
They
they've
are.
gotta pay the rent.
But
so.
they also are getting paid $20 an hour,
Yeah.
right? And so it's 30-year-olds that are working in restaurants. It's
displacing
not-
the teens,
The
yeah.
teens don't get jobs in those areas anymore, right?
Right, right. Actually, I started out with paper routes, and that really imbued a lot of responsibility and understanding of the responsibility in me. And it was also, apart from the fact of having to get up at 5 o'clock every morning, it was a valuable exercise.
One other thing you said, Paul, earlier too, is we need a young man to be the advocate, like a Steph
champion.
Curry or champion, and we need it to be a young man. So we're,
Yeah.
we're not young men at the moment. I'd like to feel like I am, but we're not.
I think it's generational differences are massive now because of the digital age, and the Z generation grew up completely digitally.
Yeah.
And I'm still a technophobe. So that's one of the barriers alone. I don't live in that sphere. It's
your
not
phone.
a manosphere. It's another
right.
sphere. It's a digital sphere. But it's hard to, I agree with you. It's hard to relate to what they might be going through.
So what is your organization doing next week? What are some like practical things that are happening around? So when you say you go to a fraternity or you're reaching coaches, when you say that, do you mean like coaches in sports coaches as well, trying to reach them and they have the audience of these young men and training them?
Well, one of the things we're doing right now is we have a requirement that at least 25% of our board be youth themselves. And we had a summit back in 2018 where we brought in a number of youth, and we had the breakout sessions, of course, and we planted the youth at each of these breakout sessions, and they were really valuable because they were a reality check. You know, the adults and the quote-unquote experts came up with all these ideas, and the guys would say, forget it, never mind. So one of the things that we are doing, that we're doing aggressively right now is setting up a youth advisory board to give us direct advice on all the programs we're doing, so that we don't start out from the base of coming from the experts and the older guys, that we're coming out being informed by the young guys themselves.
That's a great idea. That's the answer to your question.
There
Is
it
how
is.
do you get into? You got to have the people who are in the middle of it.
I think we also need to somewhat shock our generation into the facts, right? So we started with,
I mean, we're shocked.
80% of suicides are male.
Yeah.
Right? And that is shocking. Are there other stats that are out there that we can at least, so that we can be aware of, what do we need to do to smack some of us around and say, hey, wake up, your son is this and he needs help?
Suicide, it's 4 times among young males than it is among young females. And a lot of that comes from depression, which is frequently unrecognized in young males, because young males exhibit depression through externalized behavior, whereas females, it's internalized. That means that females become moody and disengaged, whereas males engage in aggressive behaviors. And so one of the things that we need to do is to look at their behaviors and to see how they map back out to mental health issues. And one of the problems is that frequently with all these, with the depression and the anxiety and the externalizing behaviors, they're prescribed ADHD meds. And in fact, there are more males that are diagnosed with ADHD than females. But we don't know whether that is because it's a male bias or whether it stems from basic issues like unrecognized depression and anxiety.
Fascinating. So the basic point is with young men to get into their mental health, look at their actions, not their words, because they don't say much. So you got to read behavior.
Right.
Like a hawk.
Is mental health getting worse? We mentioned digital influence, or are we just recognizing it more?
I think it's definitely getting worse. Now, that said, like I said before, the recent studies have shown that young men, a majority of them actually want family and the traditional lifestyle, so that we don't need to overemphasize the manosphere and the incels, if you will.
So, Dennis, what health risks do young men face at a higher rate than young women?
Well, sexual and reproductive health are really at the top, and they have higher incidence of HPV, for example. What's an interesting fact is that while HPV infection has been associated with cervical cancer, in fact, men suffer from head and neck cancers as a result of HPV infection, and they are now exceeding the incidence of cervical cancer. But that's not widely known, and in fact, part of that is because the uptake amongst with the HPV vaccine amongst young males is lower than females. But in addition to that, there are other STIs, gonorrhea, chlamydia, what have you, where the rates are higher. Of course, when you get into other areas like substance abuse, they typically are at higher rates because, again, they engage in risky behaviors. The one area where there's been a lot of attention given lately is body image and eating disorders, and that I think is a very important area because it is I think generally known. The issue of body image is really becoming quite prevalent with young males. Anabolic steroid use and so on are becoming more and more common.
I have body issues all the time that I'm always
it's not about you, Rob.
I know.
You should know better.
I know. So on the fertility side, I've often on this program talked about my own fertility issues. And when we first were having trouble having a kid, clearly my wife is the subject. They come in, how old are you? What is your count? I don't know what's that count that they do with how many eggs might be left in there, but it was really all on her, and we need to get you to IVF quickly, and nobody focused on me at all or had any questions about my own health. To me, what happened when my wife was told that she was broken is she kind of went into this temporarily insane where she went no caffeine, no wine, no everything. There was just, and that's just practical issues, but there was something wrong with her and she became obsessed. And I was kind of lucky through the whole time that the focus wasn't on me, it was on her. And I would say it affected her mental health. Now I look back and knowing that it was my issue the whole time, I probably would have been the one that is temporarily insane. Right? And you say that. It's like you come in and the man shows up at the office and it's like, this is your issue. And then they don't know how to react because they've never thought about it. They've never thought about it. Well, I'm a man, I can do this.
Right. It's eat, sleep, reproduce. There's never a problem with that. It's part of the species.
Right.
And all of a sudden there's a problem. And the id and ego and superego have no idea how to deal with it.
That's right. So Dennis, how have you dealt with kind of male mental issues, whether it be, depression or just total anxiety over fertility when they find out that they can't get their wife pregnant?
I would say that things are changing more to the positive, but in the past I don't think that there was much attention given to the mental health aspects of fertility.
I would agree with that. I mean, so your experience is kind of the experience,
typical,
which is I'm not going to worry about it, or I don't even know what to worry about until you get hit with it, and then when you get hit with it, you have no idea how to handle it, and aren't a lot of resources for you.
Yeah. In this world, are they recommending therapists while they go through this process?
I have a cadre of them, and the question is, do they reach out? Because again, having a young man, a son, or anyone reach out is a very different thing than just listening. So, I mean, we talked about that. You can't really ask them to join us. They're not going to do that,
Right.
unless it's one of their buds or a coach or a champion. They just don't. They're in their hole. They're in the basement, and I can't tell you how many times I have just stated the fact to the patient in front of me that they're infertile and they're the reason, and they would start crying. A man with his partner in front of me. I have tissues in the room because it happens so often, and I just let it go.
Yeah.
Because it's a barrier you've broken down. They realize there's something that needs to be done, and there's an acceptance that occurs with it. It's very fundamental, and I think it's important. I think it's, again, half the battle is to get that to sink into the point where, okay, this is happening to me. I don't have control. I like control, but I give up here and I'm okay. Then they can move forward. I think it's really fundamental.
Do you guys really not think that an Office of Men's Health is going to happen? And that, I mean, so if you're like, we're curing 80% of breast cancer now, like you're saying, it's just attention. It's just
awareness.
Attention and awareness, right? We all decided.
Yeah, we got a lot of blowback when we started about that because men are privileged, so why do we worry about men? Men have been privileged, for example, in the area of business, but in health, it's a totally different question.
Right.
But you don't get to the health issue because the assumption is that men are privileged.
That's the issue right there, is we have had so much focus for the right reason on women. And yet now, if we're dying, then we need to get the attention on it. We need to steer the ship back a little bit.
I mean, I see this every day in the office, how you just they don't talk. It's like, I'm a provider. I'm uncomfortable speaking about this. There's no room in the society to talk about it. There's no room for me.
I mean, an Office of Men's Health just makes
Well, it's the third
sense.
attempt. It was in the 80s. It was in 2021. It was Representative Payne, 65-year-old black man, decided to be the sponsor. There's a bit of bipartisan support 3 years ago, and he died, diabetic.
Wow.
Died at 65. So he is the actual manifestation of the problem, which is
Right.
half of black men don't live long enough to collect Social Security. And he was the proponent of the Office of Men's Health in the last iteration.
Well, it's never even gone to committee. I mean,
So you don't think this iteration of the Office of Men's Health, that bill, has any legs?
I think it has more legs than it did in the past. Let's put it that way. But I don't think politically that it's
You think the state level is a more promising avenue?
the state is just what's going on is just phenomenal. There's just really a burst of behavior at the state level.
That's exciting.
Yeah, go Virginia, by the way. That was a good one. I'm from Virginia. That's good. Another huge catalyst of change was Simone Biles in the Olympics. Is that 6 years ago now that when she couldn't perform and was like, I'm not mentally ready to perform, and everybody was like, how can she even do this? And she stood her ground and really has affected change.
Who's
who's the male equivalent of a Simone
Well,
Biles?
the ice skater, what's her name? The gold medalist in ice skating who gave it all up and came back and had an incredibly inspired performance. And it's like she's doing it for
What
love.
is it?
Alyssa Leo, yeah. And how those are perfect examples of strong mental health performances.
Who are the male celebrities out there that talk about mental health, right? Steph Curry's not young anymore either, right? We
need champions.
You need that
Right.
that really hot 25-year-old kid
Who's got
to
it
say,
together.
This is what we need to do. We really are just trying to put a spotlight on mental health in, first of all, men overall, and how that is a part of men's health overall. We as fathers and as leaders in the community are hoping to bring that awareness to young men as in their adolescence and partner with people like Dennis. So Dennis, where can they find the Partnership for Male Youth and get active in your organization?
Well, the website is partnershipformaleyouth.org, so it's relatively easy to access, and that's that's where I would refer them to.
Okay.
And I would also encourage reading his newsletter because he packs in the latest research and beautifully summarizes the stuff that's going on every day.
Can they subscribe to that newsletter on the website?
On the website.
Okay, great. And if you have any other questions for Dennis or around this mental health issue, you can also reach out to us, right? First of all, you can share this podcast with your friends that you know might be struggling or have boys that are struggling. So you can follow us everywhere that podcasts are listened to or seen on YouTube. How do people get in a hold of the Turek Clinic?
You can sign up online at turekclinic.com. But I'd also say that there are a whole lot of mental health professionals that at least I know who are really willing to help out here. They want to engage you and young men. They know the issue. They understand what we're talking about, and they work really well. So I'm happy to have an army of mental health professionals who can help.
The help is out there. It's just, hey, can we sound the alarm? If you're listening to the podcast and you know somebody, at least just be aware of it so then you can make the steps for the future of
and I think listen to your kid. Listen to them at their level. Don't try to fix things. Just listen. Absolutely. Because talking is half of the cure.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time and look forward to another conversation down the road.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining the Talk with Turek podcast with hosts Paul Turek and Rob Clyde. Talk with Turek is produced and recorded in South Pasadena, California, in association with Galaxy Media Ventures. Executive producers are Jennifer Harris and Rob Clyde. Today's episode was produced by Max Flora, engineered and edited by Drew Unser. For more information or to book an appointment, whether in person or virtual, visit Dr. Turek online at theturekclinic.com or call 888-TUREK-MD. That's 888-887-3563. Subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts and watch us on YouTube at Talk with Turek. And thanks for helping us advocate for men's fertility and sexual health.